What is something your dad did that you couldn't believe? My father was the foreman in a shop that sold tombstones, mausoleums, vaults, and the like. One day during tobacco selling season, when farmers were flush with cash, a couple came by the shop to buy a family monument. My father showed them various stones on display. They selected a very fine granite monument. He looked up the price. They paid him in cash. That night, when he got home, he told my mother that he and I needed to make a trip, so we wouldn't be having dinner. We drove the company truck many miles up into the mountains, into a county where strangers were definitely not welcome. It was moonshine territory. We stopped at various grocery stores, asking directions, to find the family that had bought the monument. At one store, he bought some saltine crackers, pork and beans, and some Vienna sausage. That was our dinner. When we finally found the family, he said, "I made a mistake. I looked at the wrong monument in the catalog. I overcharged you." He handed them a stack of bills. As I recall, some 60-odd years later, $60. On the way home, I asked him why he had spent upwards of 3 hours driving around looking for those people. After all, I said, they didn't know they'd been overcharged. Although he had superb grammar, he phrased his answer in an odd way. He said, "Son, a man has to do what's right." To this day I remember, and tried to follow, his advice, do what's right. I had this strange infection of whole face and neck swelling up after my lunch and dinner. I went to the dispensary, pharmacy, and the doctor said it was an allergy of some kind and gave medicines accordingly. The good part was, in about 15 to 20 minutes post taking the medication, I was fine, but it would irritate me a lot. This went on for a couple of months. We made a list of food I ate and found that curd was the reason behind it, so I avoided curd. One day, the infection came back without me having curd. This doctor, let's call him A, referred me to another doctor, Dr. B. I went with my dad since I was in college then. We showed him the letter given to me by Dr. A, and he asked me if the said infection was prevalent in recent days. I said yes, and without thinking, he blurted out that it was a symptom of AIDS. He told me to get my blood checked immediately. Do note time was around 8 p.m. My father asked him, "What makes you think it's AIDS?" He did not have an answer and just said he knew because he was a doctor. My father protested, "You haven't run any tests, though." He got irritated, threw the blood test form, and asked us to leave. My father told him in simple words, "This is not how you speak to a patient." He rudely replied, "Don't teach me my work." I almost ran to the blood testing center and asked her to do the test. She said I would get the results back the next day. I begged for her to give it to me the same day and didn't mind paying extra. She asked me to come after 45 minutes. I agreed. Those 45 minutes were the worst of my life. I remember my dad smoked at least 6 cigarettes. He asked me in clear words, "Did you have sex with anyone? Did you take any sort of injection?" I denied. I also didn't have a blood transfusion. The look on his face when the results came back had me praying for the doctor. The lady charged us some amount extra, but we were only more than happy to pay. We took the report and asked the nurse where doctor was. She informed doctor was on rounds, it was his own hospital. We went and waited patiently. Once he had finished rounds and went back to his office, we went in. "Test done?" asked the doctor, looking at both of us. "Yes, and we got the results too," my father said, but did not hand them over to him. The nurse had already informed him it was negative. We had shown her the report earlier. He read the riot act once inside with doctor. I had never seen him so angry. Doctor was literally scared. He was that angry. When doctor told him to lower his voice or get out, he went close to him and said, "Tell me that again, you know where I work. What are my contacts?" Doctor knew he was screwed. He apologized and asked us to leave. I noticed change in his voice. It was more of a plead, which, compared to earlier, was a huge difference. We did leave, but we also informed people who were waiting outside that the doctor was a hokum and they were wasting their time and money. Needless to say, we never visited him again. As far as my infection was concerned, it stopped the same way it had started, suddenly. I'll never forget the day I got myself into big trouble when I was caught playing with matches in the church parking lot. I knew I wasn't supposed to, but hey, it's not like I was trying to burn the place down. I was just curious how these little paper things worked. However, my curiosity as a child was rarely celebrated. There were rules and playing with matches was a big no-no. On the way home, my parents discussed my punishment. I knew I was heading for a spanking. I had been spanked before. It was not going to kill me, or even really seriously hurt me. Just a good sting that lasted for a couple minutes to reconnect the obedience nerve that went from my butt straight into my brain. Nevertheless, I was dreadfully dreading it. I thought about ways to get out of it. I could hide. I could put on as many pairs of pants I could find in my dresser to minimize the sting. I could beg my dad to forgive me and have mercy on my poor sinner's soul. I chose to beg. When we got home, I walked as slow as humanly possible from the car into the house. My dad told me to wait in the bedroom. The apprehension is worse than the actual event. When he finally came in to spank me, I had worked up a good plea. I begged my dad to punish me any other way besides spanking. I promised I would do the dishes and never play with matches again. I would be a good girl from this point on. I would. I knew it. Why didn't he? He bent me over his knee and I tightened up every muscle in my body, preparing for the impact. I heard 3 loud cracks of the paint stick hitting flesh. I did not feel a thing. It was a miracle. Then I realized what my dad had done. He put his hand between me and the paddle and took the punishment on his hand, sparing me the pain. His hand was all red. It looked like it hurt. I looked up to my dad for an explanation. He said, "There. Now you know what Jesus did for you." I cried and said I was sorry. He cried and hugged me and told me he loved me. I was only 6 years old. I've never forgotten that moment. I wish I could say that he's always been a hero. A virtuous man who always uses opportunities to show love and grace. He's a flawed and human man. He has done a lot of good with his life and missed the mark hundreds of times as well. I choose to show him mercy and compassion. Like he showed me that day long ago. And like Jesus shows us every day when our curiosity gets in the way of our better judgment and we play with fire just for the heck of it. My father is a jovial and easygoing person. Being their one and only daughter, I get pampered from both my parents. I share a strong bond with him. He always maintains a friendly atmosphere with us. We have a quality time together. Among those moments, I would like to share one of the best and memorable experience very long back. Most of the families in South India celebrates when their daughters enter into puberty. When I entered into my puberty, as usual, my parents too planned to celebrate. Though we are a middle-class family, still my father planned above his budget. The night before the function, mehandi has to be applied for both my hands. But no one is willing to do it, even my mother. Reason is, I was made to stay separately on a mat. Most of the Indians may aware of this custom during this period. And in case anyone accidentally or intentionally touches them, then they have to take a bath. I forget to mention that was October, beginning of winter. Due to this, even my mother was hesitant to touch me. She said to apply on my own, but I wasn't perfect in it. If I do, it will definitely spoil my hands, which looks awkward and everyone may laugh at me. I was totally disappointed and about to burst into tears. At that moment, my father entered into the room. My mom and I both narrated the situation. My dad said to my mom, "She is a kid, how could she apply mehandi for herself? Had she done this before?" "Yes. I haven't done before. My mother or aunts or my grandmother always takes that responsibility of applying mehandi." He finished his words while changing his dress and added, "She won't do this alone and I will not allow her to do." Saying so, he suddenly came to me and sat on the mat where I was sitting and started applying mehandi in a traditional style. My mom and I were shocked with his action. It took a second for me to realize what was happening and to enjoy the moment. My mom laughed wholeheartedly and she felt so happy for his love for me. That was a moment of both happiness and embarrassment. I am proud of my dad and his love for me. I believe no daughter will have such a memorable experience with her father. And I am blessed to have such experience. My father had TB, as diagnosed by a longtime friend, tiny bladder. He was driving his 1972 VW Bug around Lincoln Park in San Francisco looking for a parking place with the intent of parking, then taking a leak at the Palace of the Legion of Honor just up the road a piece. Dad was 75 years old at the time. As Dad started backing into a parking spot on the Lincoln Highway, a young whippersnapper pulled into the spot, jumped out of his BMW and laughed at my father, saying something like, "Faster than you, old man." Dad found a parking spot further down the road, walked up to the museum, took a pee, and walked back to the Bug. En route, he saw the BMW still in the place the fellow had parked minutes before. When Dad got back to his car, he opened the glove box, took out the tire pressure gauge with a Schroeder valve removal tool and walked back up to the BMW. Dad unscrewed and removed 2 valve cores from the passenger side of the BMW, front and rear, and threw them into the weeds, toward the Golden Gate Bridge. Dad then walked back to the Bug and drove home. When Dad told me of this, I do recall exclaiming, "Dad, I can't believe you actually did that." His only, calm, response was, "Well, what did you expect?" By the time I walked up to the museum, I almost pissed my pants. I was mad. Don't fuck with an old guy who has to pee.